Okay, so now that we're done with the equipment, it's time to show up for the game and start shooting. And so in the next series of videos, we're going to talk about how to set up and be prepared so that by the time the ball is kicked off, you're ready to go with no worries. And in this first one, we're going to talk about the importance of arriving early. And you may be saying to yourself, this is obvious, why do I need an entire section on arriving early? But as we talk through this, you're going to understand the kinds of things that can go wrong and the kind of ways that you can use the time that you have before the game to get yourself perfectly prepared with no issues. So when I have people shoot for me, we have a mandate. My shooters all arrive at games and they're supposed to be there a half an hour before kickoff. They usually send me a text to make sure you're there. And that half an hour proves very important for several reasons. The first one, I'm going to go back to a story about one of my other cameramen. This is one of the first days that he ever shot for me, and he arrived to a game about 20 minutes before kickoff. And what he didn't realize was this was a big rivalry game, a big district game, and there was a huge crowd there. So by the time he got there 20 minutes before the game, the parking lot was full and they rerouted him to another spot down the block. By the time he got down the block, unloaded his equipment, walked down the street, got through the main gate with all the people there and set up, he missed half of the first quarter. And there's no good excuse for me to give a coach if you're late. So we want to do everything we can to avoid it. So right there we had somebody that was 20 minutes early who still was late for the kickoff. And so one of the main points here, the first of 6 points we're going to talk about, is that you want to get there early because you want to beat the crowds. When you beat the crowds, you don't have to fight parking, you don't have to fight anybody in the seats. If there's a situation where you have to shoot from the bleachers, if you get there within 10 minutes of the game, the bleachers are going to be full, you're not going to be able to go to the best position to shoot the game. So you want to get there early enough, avoid traffic, avoid crowds, get to your spot and set up. So point one is to beat the crowds. Point two is we want to get the prime spot for filming, okay? So most of the time we're going to be up above the press box. There's usually an area up there. And what we're going to find is that the other team may have a cameraman there. There may be coaches up there positioning. You know, the defensive coordinator stands up there. There might be a crew filming for a local TV station or a news outlet. And if you get there 5 minutes before the game, there might already be 3 cameras and 6 coaches up there, and there's nowhere for your camera. So point two is to get there first and get your prime position when there's nobody up there, and set your camera up in the spot that you want, and then when everybody else comes up, they have to work around you. So that's the second reason why we're going to be early. The third reason is we're going to get our tripod set up properly, and we're going to do a couple of exercises to make sure we have the proper fluidity and motion to our tripod. That's point three. Point four, camera settings. We're going to make sure our camera is set properly. We're going to make sure the mic is working properly. If you have a memory card in your camera, we're going to check it, because I've had people that have had other things on their memory card. Last week's game is still on the memory card and they forgot to erase it. So by the time they shoot half of today's game, they run out of room. So we're going to check everything that we have to check to make sure the camera is set. Okay, point number 5 is kind of similar, but it's troubleshooting, okay? Troubleshooting could be anything that goes wrong. Maybe you have an impending rainstorm and you have to deal with that. Maybe you've got an issue with where you're positioned and you have to move. There might be any one of a number of things. Something's wrong with your camera. It's not functioning properly. Backup microphones, battery issues. So we don't want to show up 5 minutes before kickoff and realize we have a problem, because there absolutely is no good excuse that you can have for missing part of the action. And this half-hour cushion that I'm asking you for gives you time to troubleshoot as well. And the final one is the coach's peace of mind. We've shot for coaches and parents, and sometimes if we're not there a half an hour before, the coach looks up to the rafters to see if we're up above the press box, doesn't see a cameraman, and I'll get a text or a phone call wondering why there's no cameraman there. So when a coach looks up during pregame to make sure that his camera's there, he sees it there. And he's not looking 10 minutes before the game realizing there's not going to be any video, okay? So those 6 reasons are the big reasons why you need to be early, and I cannot stress this enough. I will add that if you work for the school, if you're an assistant coach or a student, and you're there all day anyway and you're already early, set your camera up a half an hour early. Don't wait until 5 minutes before just because you've already beaten the traffic and the crowds. So now let's recap the 6 reasons why you should be early. Number 1 again is to beat the crowds. Number 2, you pick the prime spot for filming. Number 3, you want time to set up and practice with your tripod to make sure it's right. Number 4, you want to check your camera settings to make sure everything is in order there. Number 5, you want time to troubleshoot in case something goes wrong. And number 6, you want to put your coach or your parent who hired you at ease so that they know there is a camera there that's going to be filming the game. So make sure you're there a half an hour before the game, set your camera up, and look, if you end up standing around twiddling your thumbs, that's a good thing, because it sure beats running up at the last minute and trying to set up and having an issue that you have to deal with while the game is being played. So you've arrived early for the game. Now let's talk about setting up. And this should be pretty obvious. The two key words we're going to talk about as far as where you should set up are elevate and center. And obviously that means get as close to the 50-yard line as you can, and also get as high as you can so that you can get a good vantage point. Sometimes, of course, you can't always do that. Sometimes you have very low bleachers, no press box. Sometimes they ask you to shoot from the field level, and sometimes maybe even the end zone. And for those last two, we're going to have separate modules at the end of the course that show you specifically how to handle sideline shooting and how to handle end zone shooting. But for this, we're going to talk about getting yourself as high as you can, as centered as you can. Let's take a look now at a couple of different fields to see the kind of situations that you might be presented with when you show up for a game. This one you can see, of course, has a press box above the bleachers, and there is room above the press box to shoot from. So this is the best place to shoot here. If for any reason you were late, and we talked about arriving early before, but if you're late or if there's a crowd up there and there's no room for you, you would have to shoot from the bleachers below, and that could be problematic because even though you could be centered, you might have people that are stomping the bleachers in excitement that would shake the camera. You could have heads in the way. So in a situation like this, one choice, but it's the best one, get above the press box. This next field provides a couple of different options. You can see that you have a place to go above the press box, and that is ideal. But right here you have another little area, a platform next to the press box, which we've actually shot from before and which is suitable. But you still face the risk of some shake if they're shaking the bleachers, so you want to be careful. I always recommend shooting from above the press box, but at least here you have another option to be on that platform on the side. This third field is interesting because you'll notice there is no area above the press box to shoot. It's just a roof, and you're not allowed up there. This is a fairly new field, and a lot of fields are being built this way, and what they have instead are platforms here and here on the left and right of the press box. So you have to be in one of those spots. And because of that, your vantage point, although high enough, is not going to be dead center 50-yard line. In fact, here's a shot of this field during an actual game, so you can see a little bit of the angle, how we're not quite centered, and how it looks when we're filming a team that's on the opposite end zone. It's a little further away than we'd like, but this is what you're stuck with. But you have to make do with what you have on these fields. If you wanted to shoot 50-yard line, you'd have to be right here in the bleachers. That wouldn't be ideal because, once again, you're dealing with people around you, you're dealing with the possibility of shaking bleachers, heads in the way, etc. So in this case, you have to just grin and bear it. You can't be centered. I would recommend being on one of the platforms as close to the 50 as possible, but just know that you're not going to be centered. As long as you are high enough for a good vantage point, that's key. Here's a situation where there is no press box, and there's also no platform next to the press box, so I'm forced to shoot from the bleachers. And as you can see, I am as high as I can be in these bleachers, and I am centered. I'm dead shot 50-yard line here. We've also set up our tripod in such a way that we don't have any heads that can stand up and got in our way. I've gotten this tripod up as high as I'd like, which is something that we talked about earlier with the tripods. And you may be saying to yourself, well, you've got a press box up there, it's air conditioned, it's beautiful. Well, here's the problem with that. When you're inside and behind walls, you might be able to see what's in front of you, but if you pan left or right to see what's going on in the end zones, you're going to be shooting a wall. The only way to see to the end zones from inside the press box is to lean forward and be halfway out the press box, and that's not a great way to shoot. So get that idea out of your head. We don't shoot from the press box, we shoot above it, next to it, or in this case in the bleachers. So here are the legs of my tripod, and you can see how I've set them up. I don't put the legs on the seats of the bleachers. I put the legs on the floors of the bleachers where people's feet are. And the reason we're going to do that is we have more stability and less risk of it falling. So if we, for example, had our tripod up here on the seat like this, if there's any sort of bump in the tripod or slippage, or if you knock it, there's a chance that it can come off. It's got a ledge to fall off of. So we always want to put the tripod legs where people's feet go. In fact, you can almost put it up against the bleachers like so. It almost serves as a good way to hold the tripod in place, if you can try that. Here's another bleacher setup situation, and in this case, these bleachers are a little lower than the ones I was just standing in, so in order to get as high as I can, I've chosen to stand on the top bleacher itself, and it's good that I have this fence here to lean on. But because I'm standing up on this back step, I have to get the tripod even higher. And this goes back to what we were talking about with tripods when you have this centerpiece that goes up. Most of the tripods I showed you that you can buy in an electronics store don't do this. So here's the value of a tripod that can get higher. I can stand on this step and set my tripod up so that it's high enough for me to operate. The legs are also on the part of the bleachers where people put their feet. But the difference with these bleachers, as you can see, these are not made of concrete and there are actually slats where things could fall to the ground. So your tripod legs could go falling through. So you have to be really careful of that. So I suggest you put your tripod legs on the feet as you did before. Basically hold your camera most of the time, but by standing on this final seat, you're going to get the extra elevation that you need when the bleachers don't provide it for you. So in summary, you want to make sure you're as high as you can and as centered as you can, but hopefully we've given you a couple of other options in case that scenario doesn't present itself. Now it's time to talk about how to set your tripod up properly so that you can smoothly move left, right, up, and down. This goes beyond just opening the tripod up and putting the camera on it. There are specific things you can do to make sure the camera is working with you. We're going to tweak the left and right torque and the up and down torque so that it's perfectly able to move the way you want it to move when you want to move it. So let's go upstairs right now and take a look at these techniques that you can set your tripod up perfectly. So we have our tripod set up here in the bleachers in this instance, and we're going to use two different controls, the up and down and the left and right. And this is what I want you to really pay attention to setting properly, that you have the most efficient way to move this. So if you look here, we have this dial, and this dial is my up and down tilt. You can see if I make it really loose, the camera will drop depending on the weight of the camera. Okay? If I make it really tight, it's not going anywhere. So we want to find that sweet spot somewhere in the middle, because if it's too tight and you try to tilt up or down, you might jerk the camera to get it going. If it's too loose and it's tipping, you're going to have to hold it steady before a play and you're going to have a lot of shake. So what we're going to do is we're going to dial this to the point where it's falling barely, and you can see how it's barely falling here. This is actually almost right on. We're going to get it to the point where it's almost tipping over on its own, but not quite. Okay? And that's going to allow us to move this thing smoothly up and down, almost with one finger, if you can see how I'm doing this with one finger. A little bit of resistance, I got to push it a little bit, but it's definitely not something I have to force. So by making sure this is set properly, we're not going to be in a position where we're going too fast, which is going to cause a shake, and we're not in a position where we have to push it too hard and be kind of behind it. We want that sweet spot right in here where we can move it with one finger if we had to, gently, so for nice, easy tilts up and downs. Now we're going to look at the left-right torque button, and on this particular tripod, because it may vary on yours, it's this dial right here. And you can see that if I make this really tight, this thing isn't going anywhere. And on the flip side, if I make it really loose, the tripod's really herky-jerky and loose. So what we want to do, similar to the tilt up and down, we want to find that sweet spot where it's not so tight that it can't move at all, otherwise you'll be jerking it, but it's just loose enough that we can do this with one finger. We should be able to move the camera left and right with one finger with a little tiny bit of resistance, but it should still be fairly easy. What you don't want is you don't want to get it to a point where when you push it, it goes careening out of your way. You have to keep it just tight enough that there's a little bit of resistance, because no player is going to be able to run faster than you can move this thing. So we want to have a little bit of resistance, and I like to test it with one finger. Okay, so putting it all together, we've got the left, right down. We're going to get the tilt left and right down, and now you can see if you want to practice before the game, we're going to be able to follow any action smoothly. You can almost do it with one finger. And if there's a tilt up and down necessary, you have the ability to smoothly control it. The worst part about shooting is jerky camera movement. So we want to make sure we don't have that. And by using these two techniques, up, down, left, right, with a little resistance, you're going to find that you can move your tripod really slowly and easily. Having a level tripod is really important, and most tripods have a little bubble on it that tell you whether or not your tripod is crooked or not. However, if you're up in the bleachers or above the press box, having a level tripod doesn't always guarantee that you're going to be able to shoot level. The fields at some high schools and parks are actually not level themselves, even though the press box might be. So what I want you to do is turn the camera on and point it at the other sideline across the field. Take the top of your camera frame and line it up with the other sideline. And if the two are parallel, you know that your camera is level. However, if in this example, which looks crooked just to begin with, but if, for example, you lower the camera and see that the top of the frame is not level and not parallel with the other sideline, then you know you're crooked. So just simply by using the other sideline or using some sort of horizontal plane up against the top of your camera frame, that's how you can be sure that your camera is level. Because what we don't want to do is shoot a game that looks crooked like this one. So there you go. That's how I want you to set up the tripod every game. Practice those moves before the game and make sure you have everything perfect so that when the game starts, you're ready to go.